was the second faculty member to appear on the campus. Ray Shellberg was the first one. Bert Center was the treasurer, business manager, and he was here. And of course, Hardy Rastine, you may have heard that name. He was the first resident director, they called him. He wasn't a dean or anything like that, a resident director. And this was called the Michigan College of Mining and Technology, Sault Ste. Marie Residence Center. Later on, it was called Michigan College of Mining and Technology at Sault Ste. Marie. We became known as SUTEC. You may have heard that too. Right. My office was in the old infirmary, and one of the wards was my lab, where I put the students. And actually, I was told later on that I was in the VD ward. Well, that had been converted into a classroom. And then chemistry department was downstairs in that building. It was a two-story building. And Ray Shellberg had the downstairs, and he had an addition that became a lab. We had a lot of things going on. There were no places to store the lab equipment, so Ray Shellberg went over to the Officers Club, which was still on the campus then, and swiped all the liquor cabinets and moved them over into the chemistry department. And we did all kinds of things like that. And I moved all the chairs, tables. We had library tables because we didn't have any lab counters or anything like that. And I moved them up myself, and I was confronted with, I think it was 12 or 14 of these lab tables, and I couldn't carry them up all by myself. So at that time, there were a few students that arrived. They were all ex-GIs, and they were wandering around the campus, so I commandeered some of them. They didn't know who I was. They thought I was on the maintenance crew. And they helped me move all the equipment up into the lab. And we joked and carried on. They told about some of their experiences. I'd just come back from China. And so the next morning when I arrived in class, they were very surprised to see me, the teacher. Yeah, it was funny. But we got the place set up all right. And then there was a tremendous amount of work because all the supplies were arriving, had to be unpacked. And the minerals, we had hundreds of minerals to teach with. And they came in from Ward's Natural Science Establishment in Rochester, New York. But they were all mislabeled, not all, but I'd say about 20% of them were mislabeled because they had high school kids doing the labeling down in Rochester. Well, everything was in the turmoil at that time. And, so I was busy. I would get to work at 6 or 7 in the morning and work until usually 10 or 11 at night, getting all this stuff ready. That was a lot of work. But we finally got it going. Classes started, as I remember. You could check this. I'm not sure. But I think it was November 5th. Well, I had taught before. I was a teacher since 1941. I'd been teaching for 5 years. I was a flight instructor. And then I also taught all the ground school for the Fontana School of Aeronautics up at Michigan Tech. And then when I came here, I found the little operator, Leonard Caposilli, was starting a little flight school, so I applied there too. I got to teach flying as well as ground school up here. So in the summertime, that first summer, that would be 47, I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and fly from 5:30 until 6:30, come back and then work at the college and then teach ground school at night. I couldn't do it now. I wouldn't do it now. But when I got here, I thought left. Some didn't even stay a year. But I could see where this might develop something. And particularly here, because we have a very interesting geology. I don't know how much geology you know. You didn't have to take geology from me, did you?
No.
No.
I would love to have, though.
You would have. A lot of the students did. And a lot of the faculty people sat in on my class too. But the rocks over on the Canadian side are Precambrian, they call them. And the ones on this side are Paleozoic. And we're sitting right at the juncture, so we can have two completely different assemblages of rock to teach in, and it's great. It's potentially a very good place to teach geology.
Was that part of why you chose to come here from Poland?
No. The reason I came here was because I was, as I say, I'd just come back from India, where I was flying the hump over into China. They closed that operation down. I was with Pan American Airways. And so Pan Am shipped me home, and I had a wife and 2 kids to feed. And Dr. Snellgrove up at Michigan Tech, he was head of the geology department, asked me one day, said, how would you like to go to the Sault? Why not? I said, sure. So that's how I got the job. Then when I got here, I realized the potential of this place for teaching geology. And as I told you, we had 2 of the retired faculty members were students in that first class. That was Dave Knowles and Ken Hatfield. And then Paul Kelso, who's still there. He was much later than that. He graduated from Lake State. And I forget, it's in the almanac, 80, 89, 90 or something like that. He's got his PhD from University of Minnesota. He's a geophysicist, a real intelligent young man. So I saw the department grow from just me for many, many years. I was the department head. Somebody asked me, where did I hold my department meetings? And I said, in the bathtub.
What about most of the students were GIs?
That first class, I think all but 15% were returning veterans, because they could go on the GI Bill, you know. That was a great deal for them. And I think that's the figure, about 15% were straight out of high school, including one was in my class, Dr. Mandarino. He's now Dr. Mandarino. He's retired from University of Toronto. And he was here in June when we had that dedication of the museum. He's one of the foremost mineralogists in Canada, Dr. Mandarino. He has lots of publications. Everybody knows him. Real nice person. No. I got him introduced to the subject. He could teach me now. See, that first group was only 270-something, the first group that started here. And we started the second, we started the first year, second group in January. They were a term behind. But because the demand was so great for spots in an engineering school that we decided, or I don't know who decided, to go ahead and start a whole other class in January. And so I had beginning geology and second term geology both being taught in January of that year. And in those days, we had a very good system in it. I think we got carried away and lost somewhere along the way. But instead of these NS courses for science that they require that you take a certain amount of science, the only requirement was that you had to have a year of a science. And it didn't matter whether it was chemistry or physics or whatever you wanted to, or geology. Well, biology was very popular then with the students. geology over some of these other sciences. He said, well, he didn't like the mathematics part of physics and chemistry. There was too much math. And he didn't like cutting up animals. So he said, I took geology instead. That's a great reason to take a course. But I had a lot of those. I got a lot of non-geology types in my class. And I converted a few of them into being geologists, because most of them had never heard of geologists. I hadn't either when I switched into geology. That was a completely new experience.
What kind of experience?
Well, it was part and parcel of Michigan Tech. We even had the same course numbers. We had the same courses, the same textbooks, and everything was. My department head was Dr. Snellgrove at Michigan Tech in Holton. And the other departments were the same. They had the department head over in Holton. And during those first few years, I was on the Michigan Tech Faculty Senate. And I used to have to go once a month to Senate meetings in Holton. That was kind of exciting in the wintertime. You could only get, that first year, you could only get the first year here. Then we added a second year in some disciplines. And I talked them into letting me teach geology, second year geology here. And I had to twist some arms to do that. But we got it okayed here. And then all the students would go either to Michigan Tech or to usually Michigan State if they were in courses or in curricula that they didn't teach up at Holton. Like business, for example. We had business students here. That was very interesting. She was the postmistress for Sault Ste. Marie, Mrs. Ripley. And then we started getting a few females, women. Well, I suppose you could use the term interchangeably.
What kinds of things?
I started getting girls in some number. By 1960 we had quite a few girls. And then we had quite a few taking geology. Several of them have graduated and they're doing very well. Yeah.
Could they live on campus at that time?
No, there was no facility for the girls until Osborne Hall was built. Now it wasn't until, I don't remember what day that was, sometime later. And that was a girls' dorm.
Could men live there, though?
No,
Okay, so there was nothing there to start with.
that's right. Not for women.
Or men.
Or men either, that's right. Well, yes, we had a barracks, the old barracks building, that's now South Hall. And that was converted into a dormitory. It was strictly an Army dormitory, with bunk beds all lined up.
And that's the way the students would live?
Yeah, and then there was a cafeteria. There used to be another building, exactly duplicate of South Hall, where Crawford Hall now is, and it burned down. And between the two was the cafeteria. And the fellow that ran the cafeteria was my neighbor up on that duplex where we lived on campus. The Army left a whole pile of coal and out there the west end of the campus. Yeah. Well, this pile of coal was soft coal, and it decrepitates, as they say, when it's left outside. It's not like anthracite, which is very hard, weathers beautifully. This stuff breaks down into a sort of a powder, or crumbles all to pieces. And that's what we had for coal. Well, in my furnace, up there, quarters 19, I didn't have a stoker. I had to load it all by hand, which I did. But the big offices building, see, that was the non-commissioned officers' quarters where we lived. And the other quarters, the officers' quarters was on that row, still there, long row. And they had stokers. Well, trying to feed wet, crumbly coal into a furnace is a job minor explosion, but blew the door open because gas would build up in this wet coal, and then all of a sudden it would catch. Well, the famous experience was what Ray Shellberg had. His wife's name was Marion. They'd come down from Michigan to take it home, and they had 2 kids. Yeah. Bobby Shellberg, you probably heard of him. He's a general. Well, but Ray's a chemist. He's supposed to know about gases and this sort of thing. So Marion had the house all cleaned, right from attic to the bed. They were pretty dirty when we got in. So she was all proud of her new clean house. So what happened was that Ray Shellberg went down to fire up the furnace, and he found that the coal was such poor quality by then that the worm in the furnace dug a hole through it, and the stuff wouldn't fall in, and so his fire was going out. So he was in the basement, mind you. It was 8, 9 o'clock at night. So he went and he stirred up the fire and got it going a little bit. And he got rather disgusted with the whole procedure and just took a shovelful, loaded the furnace with coal. Well, of course, the damp, wet coal immediately put the flame out, but the fire was still going. And he was still down there when this horrible explosion takes place. Blew the door right off the furnace. And Marion wondered what the heck was going on. She went down to the basement steps, opened the door, and she said, here was 2 eyes coming up. And the whole house was covered in coal smoke. And they had to go through and clean it all again. And there's a story that we tell about Vigo Thompson, who was a biology teacher. You've heard of him, I presume, Vigo. Real nice person. He died some time ago. His wife's still living in town here. Anyway, Vigo was a great enthusiast about his biology, and he had animal specimens, stuffed animals, and all kinds of things. When the fire was at its height, one of my students was helping take stuff out, and the student said to me, he said, who is that guy down there in the biology department? I said, well, that's Vigo Thompson. He said, he's standing there with the house burning down, explaining what a beautiful specimen this is that he's got. That was Vigo, but we lost that whole building. And that resulted in Crawford Hall. And Harry Crawford went to work and got the appropriation to build Crawford Hall. And I was still down in the other part then. Later on, when they put the new addition on Crawford Hall, that's when they moved me. Now it was quite a bit later. I don't remember what year we moved. Then one time, the other building that burned was the old auditorium. It was an auditorium building that the Army had for movies and plays and what have you that they put on for the soldiers.
Where was it located?
Well, it would be just east of where Crawford Hall now is, practically on that road that comes in between Crawford and dormitory there, Brady Hall. Yeah, it was between Brady and the other building. That one went. Then they demolished the auditorium, which also housed the forestry department. At the beginning, we had a forester here, Fritz Moyer, who also was a good friend of mine. All these outdoor types I used to play around with. But started accidentally by workman's tools. Somebody had left some, overheated some pipes or something while cutting them with a torch, and the whole place went up. Smoke was a little bit questionable because the company that was tearing the building down got away. I mean, it was a set amount for tearing it down. When they set fire to it, it saved quite a bit of money. It was great. No lives were lost. No equipment was lost. Yeah, well, I took students on field trips all well into the 80s. And I became so crippled up that by that time I'd hired my former students to come and do the bull work. They did. They took over for me. Some of the things that you might be interested in that we've lost in a way in the process of growing up was in those first few years, the faculty, and I forget how many of us there weren't an awful lot, and the faculty wives would get together and put on parties for the faculty. And we knew everybody. We knew each other. We had a Christmas party every year for faculty kids, and, well, for all the children, both faculty and maintenance. And we had a faculty wives club that did an awful lot to help build up the college. They called themselves Faculty Women's Club. It included any female teachers that we had. We had few. We had 3 math teachers that were almost the entire math department was all women, strangely enough. I mean, women are supposed to be great at math. Well, that's a bunch of nonsense. Some men aren't very great at math either.
That's a good statement.
Yeah. Well, I think there is a difference. Girls, women, by and large, don't gravitate towards the math courses. But Delphine Carlson, you may have heard of her, and Bessie Stow. I don't know if she's still alive or not. She must be pushing 100 now, if she is. And Harriet Runge, who later married one of our economists at the college. They moved away. She's now Harriet Vance. You may have heard of her, too. Then we had a couple of English teachers that were women, and they were members of the Faculty Women's Organization. But they did an awful lot. We put decorations up at Christmas time. And, we used to send almost all of our students to Tech. They'd go, and one year, the valedictorian at Michigan Tech and the student president at Michigan Tech and the salutatorian at Michigan Tech, when they graduated, all started here. So we figured we were doing a good job.
What was the progression? First you had only 1 year,
Yeah,
and then
2 years. Then for a long time, that's all we had. For 10, 15 years. And then we started talking Michigan Tech, and letting us have a 3rd year. And then we decided to have our own degrees. And the first one of our own degrees, I don't remember what year that was in engineering technology, because they didn't have any engineering tech courses at Michigan Tech. We started that here. And I remember Harry Crawford giving out degrees to the engineering tech 2-year graduates. They were 2-year graduates. And that's the first graduation ceremony we had. And I don't remember what year that was. Sometimes right after the Civil War, I think. Well, not quite that far back.
A little later.
Coach was Jim Myers. You may have had a hockey team until much later. It must have been around 1960 that we developed a hockey team. And that took off. Well, Sault Ste. Marie was always a great hockey town. The Red Wings used to have their summer practice up here in the Fuller Stadium. And all go over and eat at the Antlers. So this was a natural for us to get into. And the football was miserable because by the time the last games were played, you're waist deep snow and colder and all get out. It wasn't much fun. So Jill and I discontinued. Well, we'd already discontinued football long before that. Yeah. The Hardy Ristine only stayed here 1 year, I believe. Then he went on to Arkansas. Got a good job down there.
Now, there was a basketball team called Hornets.
Yeah. That was a good team. They did very well. And that was under Jim Myers, who coached that and organized it. And that was the sport at Michigan, at the Sioux branch, or Sioux Tech as we called it, until hockey was started. And then hockey became the dominant sport, and still is. Well, we've gone way beyond what we were doing when we started here. And with the addition of Dr. Kelso, we're going to be able to get into geophysics, which I think is very important because almost all geological work today involves geophysics rather than just straight geology. So we're all set as long as we keep Kelso there, get a good mineralogist. We have a unique method of teaching mineralogy, which we inherited from Michigan Tech. It was a completely different method of teaching and of identification of minerals. It requires no equipment, no great amount of laboratory stuff. You have to use your head somewhat, which is often difficult. But it was devised by A.E. Seaman at the museum up at Houghton is named for A.E. Seaman. But it was his son, Willis, that really developed it. And Willis was my teacher when I was up at Tech. And he was a real character. I worked for him. I was one of the few students that could stand him long enough to work for him. And he taught me a lot. He was real good. And so we brought that method over here, and I taught it to Dave Knoll, who's been teaching mineralogy up until this year when he retired. And now we're trying to teach the new guy the same method. We're even hoping to rewrite the mineral tables. That's what all that mess on my desk is. Well, not all of it. The part over here on the left. Well, what I'm anticipating is that in another 10 years, I probably won't be around, but if I am, it'll be fine. I'd like to see it. We'll have graduate programs in geology and biology and chemistry, physics, hopefully. Geophysics, of course, would be involved in. I became head of the geology, physics, and mathematics department. Did you know that? Oh, you did. Which was very strange because I never got beyond a bachelor's degree. And I was head of a department with 7 PhDs in it. Well, yeah, it was very, the faculty was just great to work with. They really were. You know, they could have had their nose out of joint, but I wouldn't have blamed them, but they didn't. They're very supportive. The addition of the college then was a college when we started here to the community was a tremendous benefit to the community. And you can have a very high regard for the fact that they had an opportunity, which they wouldn't have had if we hadn't been here. Bud Mansfield, you know Bud Mansfield. Well, he went up here to Sault, and he's often said that he wouldn't have gone to college if we hadn't been there. And his kids went up to college. My kids all went up to Sault or whatever we called it then. So in that respect, we were a definite addition. There were some people, I suppose you'd call them UP rednecks, who resented having this elite group of intellectuals. Well, if they'd come and seen us, they'd know we weren't an elite group of intellectuals, far from it. But that did get some noses out of joint, which is to be expected, but it was very minor. And then one of the things we did, that I did in particular, was to offer courses to the general public, night classes. And this was back in 48. Yeah, I was just coming down with arthritis. That was it. When uranium was discovered up here north of the Sault, at little Camray Mines was what they called the original discovery. And I was there shortly after it was announced. Roy Ranson and I walked in. We met the guy, Bob Campbell, that discovered the uranium, making a tremendous splash. So that winter, I offered a class in mineralogy for amateur prospectors. And I went to Harry Crawford, I guess, was in charge by then. No, it must have been Russell. Chet Russell must have been in charge about that. Anyway, whoever it was said, well, you can't offer a class unless we have at least 10 people in it. It's got to be that much to make a viable group. And we charged, I forget, some nominal fee. 80 people showed up in the first class. Well, there was a great fever of excitement. A lot of people had camps up in Canada, and they all wanted to go out prospecting because the government was offering a $10,000 award to the next person to find a viable deposit, uranium deposit. We were short of uranium. The only source of uranium at that time was up at Great Bear Lake. That was before the Elliott Lake deposits had even been found. That's a whole other story. I was involved in some of that. But when I offered that class, 80 people showed up, including the mayor of Sault Ste. Marie. Dr. McBride was there. Several other MDs from the Sault were in the class. Just an awful lot of people. So I kept offering mineralogy for the layman, geology for the layman, for years after that. I always had a big group in there. So it ended up that half the town at Sault Ste. Marie has been in my class at one time or another. That early group of students was a very cohesive, fun-loving bunch. And they would do all kinds of things. You know, like on these field trips I took them on. One year, well, what I found out was that at spring vacation, I'd take these students and we'd go up on a camping trip, canoeing usually. And one year we drove all the way from the Sault here at night, all night long, up to Cochrane. I don't know if you know where Cochrane is, up there near Timmins. And with our canoes strapped to the top of the car. Then we rented some canoes up there, Timmins, at Cochrane. I put in with, let's see, I had 14 or 15 students along on the first trip. And we paddled down the Abitibi River to where it joins risky, actually. But, they remember that. Outstanding. I have all the slides of that trip. In fact, I think my daughter went along on that one. We did that a second time some years later. And by that time, I was all crippled up. In fact, I'd had a couple of hip replacements by then. I'd had 5. So. And Gloria came along. That's just before we married. We made the trip in May, and we got married in June 1969. But those were great trips. And, I've taken them on several different trips like that. 3, 4, 5 days out in the bush, paddling down rivers, and all these greenhorns. I got all kinds of stories to tell. One time I put in up here at Ranger Lake, and my partner was Jim Knight, who was a geologist working out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania now, and owns a company. But we got on this lake, Ranger Lake, and Jim Knight and I pulled out with our canoe, and several others had gotten away before we did. And all of a sudden I hear this horrible shout, and I look back to where we got in the water. And here were those 2 simple-minded yahoos. They had loaded their canoe with their sleeping bags and stuff, and then they'd gotten in the canoe and pushed away from shore and realized that they were facing each other. So then they decided that they better change position, so they both stood up. And, of course, they flipped over into the water. And here it was Memorial Day, so the ice had just gone out a little while before. So we paddled back, and 2 or 3 other canoes came back. We pulled these 2 yahoos out of the water. I put them on the shore and told them get in the car and go home. Well, they were soaking wet. And I don't know if you've ever tried to pull a soaking wet sleeping bag out of the water. Must have weighed 250 bucks. Well, in the Sioux, there are only 2 types of building stone that are used as what we call dimension stone. That's cut into blocks. One is the sandstone that you see the Episcopal Church and the Methodist Church are made out of blocks of sandstone. Pardon? Yeah, the sandstone came from the power canal. When they dug out the power canal, they took that sandstone that was there and used it to make these buildings. And a lot of the homes in the Sioux have sandstone walls in the basement made of the same rock. The other type of rock that we have is from Drummond Island, and that's a dolomite. And several buildings here. The old courthouse is made out of Drummond dolomite, the lighter colored rock. So we have 2 rock types that are quarried.
The old courthouse is all dolomite?
No, it's got sandstone trim. Yeah.
Sandstone is more the pinkish.
Yeah, yeah. And the dolomite is sort of now it's kind of a dull gray, but it's dolomite from down in Drummond Island.
And they have equal properties for...
No, completely different.
What is it? I would think sandstone would be sturdy, but is it?
No. Dolomite's very sturdy. The only difference is that the sandstone is much more abrasive, which doesn't matter because, unless you want to scratch your back up against the building. The dolomite, on the other hand, is subject to weathering due to acid rain or something like that. That tends to eat up dolomite. It's carbonate. It's a type of limestone, actually. It's the flatland in the Sioux, Ontario. As you go north from the Sioux, you're on a fairly flat going until you reach up, there's a bridge to the north end, and then you get all these hills. Well, the sandstone abuts against those. It doesn't underlie them because the sandstone is about, I don't know, 600 million years old, whereas the rocks on the other side are up in 1.2 billion.